Hello, everybody. Yes, this is Colin from a very wet and windy Auckland evening, actually. So I hope you're a little warmer and snugger than we are here at the moment. What I'd like to start with this evening, or your morning, is a quote. And it's a quote by Lady Lou Henry Hoover. She was wife of President Hoover. And what she said was, "I believe there's a future in anything that one is vitally interested in." And I guess that's how it sort of captures how I feel about the insights industry at the moment, as it's going through some pretty challenging times. So why challenging times? Why would we even question the future of our industry? And, particularly the topic of today's session, the future of data collection. By the way, you'll have to forgive the Lord of the Rings images. Being based in New Zealand, the trilogy tends to be our go-to place for anything dark and foreboding. And if you know that, I'm sure most of you know the story, but, Shelob was the spider who lived in an underground cave. And to be honest, you'd have to live in a very secluded cave somewhere not to be aware that data collection has passed its halcyon days. And instead, I think it's going through some pretty troubled, if not tempestuous period. And I don't think it's just one problem. I think certainly one of the problems is that clients are just tired of information overload. We've got more than one CEO or CMO in New Zealand who has effectively banned the collection of new data. In one case, it's because he actually believes his customers have just had enough of answering questions. And in the other case, it's because he believes the company just simply doesn't need any more data. Then, we've got a whole separate stream around how we collect data and how good panels are. Do people do it for the 50 cents or, because they want to offer genuine feedback? And then, lots of questions about, why do, for example, a client's customer list panelists answer questions quite differently from, a recruited panel list? What is the issue, and does it matter around using trained respondents? So, quite a lot of things backing up that not making us feel good about data collection. And then, of course, there's the opinion polls. Now we know they've been very unfairly criticised for getting it wrong, but you try defending that point of view, at your next dinner party. No one's interested in the technical details of accuracy. It boils down to the fact that they think we called it wrong. So that means we're 100% wrong. They're not interested that we actually were very close, just a few percentage points out. And I'm only going to mention this once, but, good old Cambridge Analytica, that debacle has done to people's faith in data collection and privacy, and it's just too depressing to discuss. So I think, and I do believe the evidence shows that, people are overwhelmed and they're just suffering from overload. And it's in no small part to blame is this over-reliance on, wiggly lines, these minor shifts in data points. It's just dulled people's appetite for expensive data. And especially data that doesn't impact on decisions. And, we've all heard the quotes about, no one ever made a decision based on a tracker. And then good old behavioural science, that's dented the credibility of survey data for sure. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that later. Plus the misuse of private data, and what we've now got is this kind of halo of unpleasantness. We've got falling response rates, we've got a reality check on the quality of panels, and we've got clients questioning both the reliability and the representation of data. But, in a time of, uncertainty and fake information peddling, true knowledge should be our king. Maybe it should be Odin as our symbol rather than a king. He was the Nordic god of knowledge, and, he's especially relevant to our business because in his relentless search for knowledge, he discovered the runes, and they're the basis of an ancient alphabet, which is symbolic of the creation of meaning. And that, of course, is the role of knowledge, to create useful, relevant, and decision-driving meaning. And I don't think that, knowledge for client companies has ever been more important than it is today, because the value of life is increasing, and admittedly not everywhere, and it's shameful that still in too many parts of the world, life is cheap. But globally, people want more from life. They want more from governments, they want more from social policy, they want more from companies and products, and they want more from services. And they don't want more of the same, and that's the key point. but they want more of what matters to them. They want more of what they value and what gives their life meaning. Now, that might be the efficient use of time, you know, or it might be a, I don't know, a much more lofty desire for, say, social equivalence. And to understand meaning means understanding people's belief systems. You know, that's not their superficial attitudes to brands, which, yeah, I suppose is also one of the other causes that, you know, data collection has been undermined. Attitudes to things like brands are certainly utterly unreliable, they're unstable, they don't predict, or they don't even indicate behaviour. So, you know, for example, segmentations based on attitudes, you know, at best are irrelevant and at worst misleading. So, you know, it's really no wonder that data collection is in the naughty corner. So to deliver what people really need in companies, you know, that will inspire ideas, that will create, you know, generate creativity, and, you know, really importantly, enable them to make well-informed decisions, we need good knowledge. So if knowledge is a good driver of the decisions, then how do we, you know, from that we will stay relevant to customers, you know, the customers who are searching for meaning in their lives will trigger changes in behaviour, you know, whether that's around your products or social policy. We'll understand their actual customer needs, you know, not just polishing up the company's touch points, you know, and of course the Holy Grail will have successful innovation. So the question for us is, how are we going to ensure that our business, the Insights business, is an active partner in that process by providing knowledge through data collection in ways that are going to circumvent this kind of negative halo that's hanging over us. So what I'm going to give you this evening is just my version of 5 principles, if you like, my version of how I think we can tackle these problems, you know, going forward into the future. One of the biggest culprits of data collection, and it's one of the shifts, you know, the big shifts that I want to talk about, is to recognise that the collection of data doesn't have to be about asking questions. And that means not spooning with marketing. So what I mean by spooning is that marketing asks, you know, how many people would buy this at $5? And researchers used to go out and say to people, would you buy this for $5? You know, then we do a bit of clever modelling. We, you know, reduce the top box because history tells us that, you know, that'll be an inflated number. We might do that by applying some assumptions about how many people would be aware of it, how many people would have availability to buy it, you know, would they shop in a store where it was stocked? And we'd kind of alight on this, you know, statistically assumption-based numbers. So despite asking all those direct questions, we still ended up with a guess. So, you know, if asking questions is so unreliable, and we now know that it does, you know, what else are we going to do? So, you know, listening is the other option, and there are lots of ways to listen and to observe. You know, people chatter constantly, and their chatter is natural narrative of what matters to them. They chatter visually, it goes in words. You know, they post on social media and blogs, and of course they show how they feel by their actions. One of the biggest culprits, I mentioned this earlier, to undermining data collection is, of course, behavioural economics. There's another quote I've always loved, which is from Kant, which is dare to understand. And I think that's where we stand with applied behavioural science at the moment. You know, we intuitively know it's true, but it's a very inconvenient truth because it's turned upside down so much of what we've previously believed. And, you know, for the purposes of this exercise, the key concept is that people can't answer your questions accurately, but they'll have a go anyway because people are essentially helpful and nice and don't want to look stupid. But what you'll get is an illusion of good data, but it's based on a falsehood. And now that that particular cat is out of the bag, your clients now know this to be the case. But, you know, it's not all bad news. There's lots of good news. There's lots of ways around the problem from a survey perspective. I'm sure you're all familiar with techniques like implicit tests, you know, that capture fast responses, so system one thinking, for example, or capturing in the moment techniques that, you know, don't rely upon people reconstructing their memories. And, you know, equally our understanding of how our brains work and what drives behaviour means we know that likelihood to purchase top boxes don't work. But what we do know is that you can ask about other people's future behaviour, and that's very reliable. You know, whether you do that through predicted markets or simply through the phrasing of the questions that you ask in that way. And of course, these days we have access to client data. So if we want to know what people are doing, we don't ask them, we look at the data, or we use our eyes. You know, listening and observing was what I mentioned earlier. And, you know, data collection by GoPro generates great insight. You know, we recently did an entire segmentation based on GoPro data alone. So the big bonus for data collection, of course, is to be found online. And, you know, the previous speaker talked about this, listening to people's natural conversations around topics, using text analysis and AI to build engines that, you know, can classify that content, has really transformed what we know about what matters to people, how they're talking about it, how they respond to things. You know, and it's not a coincidence that skills like semiotics and especially discourse analysis are on the rise. And, you know, I'm talking here about metrics, but it's not just hard metrics. You know, in the qualitative area, we're using self-directed narratives. So I don't know whether you're familiar with that, but it's, you know, people talking to their friends and their peers without the interference of a moderator. So self-moderated groups is the simple way probably of explaining that. So the second principle that I want to talk about is moving from portrait to a landscape view of people. One of the points I made earlier was about knowledge through data collection helping to keep organisations relevant. And traditional data collection just doesn't have a good record in that regard. You know, I referenced spooning with marketing earlier. Instead, what I think we should be doing is spooning with people if we're going to provide organisations what they need in order to stay relevant. I really believe we need to take a whole person approach, not a slice of person approach. And what I'm finding really interesting is that work around customer experience, which is a really new area, but it's adopting terribly old-fashioned data collection methods and real slice of people approaches. So journey maps, for example, you know, start with the organisation's touch points. Now, they may or may not be relevant or even the same perceived points on the customer's journey. It's their journey, not yours, that you should be understanding. The same is true about asking people to remember a customer experience which happened at a particular time of day and in a particular emotional state. Yet we're going to ask them at 9 o'clock at night when they've put the kids to bed and have got a glass of wine in their hand to help them mellow out. So how can we possibly expect for that data to have any value and validity? So to take a whole person approach, there are lots of ways to do this. I use a framework that makes sure we look at the individual. So that's all of our individual tics and traits and, you know, the things that make us unique. But we also look at the social context, the influence that their social groups have upon people, and cultural influences, because all of those things have an impact on people's behaviour and on their decision making. So to do that kind of thing, you have to step back and take a landscape view. So instead of a more psychology-based view, instead of digging deeper and deeper holes, we need a more anthropological approach so that we're looking broader rather than deeper. So the third principle is about a move I think we need to make from seeing ourselves as hunters to being gatherers. I did a bit of research when I was preparing for this. The researcher in me never goes away. So in the last 12 months, my company, 20% of its revenue came from projects where we didn't collect any new survey data at all to answer the client problems. 70% of the projects were a hybrid of some new data collection, you know, whether it be that quant or qual, and social listening or existing data analytics. So only 30% of our projects in the last 12 months were based purely on survey data collection. And the same is true of people. So we've got, within the business, we're a business of about 40 people, well, actually 40 people, not about. 25% of them are data scientists or AI experts or social media scrapers. Anyway, people generally doing clever stuff I don't really understand, but who I interact with every single day, and so does everyone in the team here. We've got 30% who are generalist knowledge gatherers, is what I call them. Some of them, they'll have some qual skills, some quant skills, but they're not technical experts. So we've got 20% of our team here who are technical qualitative or technical quantitative experts. We then got 15% who are culture experts and 10% who are storyteller designers. So in a company our size, so 40 people, that means we only have 8 people who are narrow technical experts in traditional data collection methods. So my argument is we need to move from less single-minded Q&A to looking at data from multiple sources to be gatherers. You know, and if we think of the analogy of primitive hunter-gatherers, you know, when people had gorged on meat, they could lie around for a few days before they need more sustenance. You know, but today's fast-moving agile world, this kind of relaxed way of being just doesn't work. You know, every client is in fear of the next big disruptor. So an always-on approach to knowledge and data collection is what we just got to deliver as an industry. We always have to be gathering. Well, we've just moved to that model with one of our clients, an agile client relationship, where we'll be mining existing data, where we've put in data engines and culture engines. Our response to questions, business needs and business questions is, you know, not we'll go and do a survey, but we'll have a look at that for you and get back to you. And that's going to cause big changes in our business models too, probably outside of the scope of this conversation. But one point I do want to make, because I get challenged on this, and I have been challenged on this before, is that this all sounds a bit woolly, and you know, the industry has worked so hard to stop being people who produced interesting information, instead to be people who use that information to help solve organisations' problems and to meet their goals. And that hasn't changed. We still need people whose eyes on the end objective. But we need to be gatherers along the way. We need to wander wherever it takes us to find that insight and to enable us to do that job well. So that brings me to my next point, I suppose, which is that it's not good enough anymore as to have a single data line, to have a linear approach to data collection. If the source of your data is from asking questions, that's what you're likely to get. But if it's from listening to social media, discourse analysis of press coverage, Google searches, the client's data, AI and machine learning, as you know, was discussed in the previous paper, you can develop strategy, you can help with the development of innovation, and you just can't pump that back through a traditional survey. You know, it has to feed back into the same loop. You are literally creating a learning, knowledge-based engine. So you need to sense test, and you gather conversations about whatever the topic is that you are looking at. You need to be able to feed that back into the system. So that does require us to build knowledge engines. That could be an insight engine for a client organisation. It could be an internal data source engine for your own business, or it could be a culture engine. So I'll give you an example. We did a piece of work recently to develop a future-focused strategy for socialisation. Now, we didn't go out and run a survey or do a few groups asking people what they thought socialisation would be like in the future. The entire project was based on desk research, social scraping, and talking to leading-edge culturalists and other people in relevant fields. Now, the client was delighted, but as always, you know, they needed money to fund the next stage of the project. So they needed some metrics to help them decide what to prioritise. Now, there's no way that we could put that through a quantitative survey. So instead, we used our culture engine that provides kind of a dynamic model of what the cultural movements are and the cultural currents as they evolve or they decline, or like an amoeba, you know, they break off into other components. And then we feed this output back into the model so it learns and grows. And it's an always-on available resource for the client. So my last point is around where we should be in terms of our role in the organisations that we serve. So my final principle is that we have to take our data and move it to being tell, not show, in less kind of finding the single story in the data and more creating a story from the data and getting our clients in a position that they're ready to execute. So I was really fortunate recently to talk to one of the screenplay writers on the Minority Report, and he told me they wrote that story in a completely different way from traditional story writing. What they did is they took a series of ideas, things that might be possible in the future, and they set, when they'd got those, they kind of laid them out literally, and then they created a story around them. And as they were writing this, the new ideas, you know, new things that were emerging technically that would become possible, and they would slot those in, and the story would constantly evolve and grow around those new ideas. And that's the approach we need to take. We need to get comfortable with constantly moving data gathering, you know, not producing that definitive deck from a finite set of data. So just a couple of very brief last points. First of all, what that's going to mean for client agency relationships. So, you know, the big step for client organizations is, you know, they've challenged the industry to change its way and get on board with new and better data collection methods. Now we need to find a different business model and different ways of working to create an always-on data flow, and to work with their partners to use the data collected to get the business ready to execute, to go beyond, you know, implications are great, recommendations are wonderful, but to use this always-on data in a feedback loop of data engines to grow not just machine learning, but to grow people's learning. And the final point really is about talent. When I recruit these days, I'm looking for listeners, not question askers. I'm looking for curious, you know, heads up people, not heads down people. There'll always be room for specialists, but I'm looking for generalists. I ask people what was the last thing they read, and if they do a Sarah Palin on me and say, oh, lots of things, but I can't really remember anything in particular, they don't get the job. You know, on a slightly more serious note, and to the topic of this conference, you know, millennials don't have a high regard for traditional data collection. They're the ones most disillusioned by the issues around this, and they're just the people I think we want in the business. Thank you.